And the purpose of our lesson here is to suggest how to write good introductions. The first idea for our essay is we want to hook the reader. And there's a lot of different options that you can do. You can start with an explanation or a shocking statistic, or you could tell a brief anecdote. And last but not least, introduce interesting terms. Unfortunately, the introduction is one of the few places of creativity, even though it may be brief. Um, the second part of an introduction is a narrowing step or a preview step, and we're going to look at a few different options for how that could work. But basically, you want to bring the topic and the thesis into more focus. You also want to preview or hint at the main points later in the body of the essay. And last but not least is the thesis. Ours happens to be very specific. What are the articles and what theme or idea do they have? So that said, I wrote a couple of exemplar essays. The first, or sorry, introductions. The first one is the one that was provided in the model. And what I did here is I started off with terms that had to do with the ideas in the essay. I knew that perseverance and tenacity and grit were very important. So I started off with perseverance, tenacity, and grit are some of the most sacred words in the vocabulary of success. And I use little that make the word and severe, perseverance, etc. So I went with, for mine, I had done option basically number 4 here, which was to introduce interesting terms or ideas. This also counts as number 1 as well. So the next step was kind of the narrowing step. So I kind of imply that this is related specifically to this part. This is kind of where I go from the big idea of perseverance and grit and in those big words to specifically what it takes to be successful. So these, especially there, that's the gap that's the narrowing step, along with the power of the ingredients of success, and are expressed in the following sources. Now, our essay, we had to analyze 3 different sources from 3 different media, so this kind of fulfills and previews for the reader what's going to be happening in this essay. Another option. So on this list, you could do a brief anecdote that is related to the big idea of the essay. Now, there are a couple rules that you have to follow when you're doing that, but I want to show you it being done. So, first and foremost, I started with an anecdote here. And when you have an anecdote that is a story within the story, you have to indent it like this. And actually, looking at the Word document itself, where this is found, you'll notice that when I click into this text, that is the setting right there for how it has been indented. And you but this, because it's still part of the first paragraph, does not get indented. So going back to the model here that I'm marking up, Michael O'Hara could feel his heart racing underneath his gown. He was walking in the line toward the stage with his cap awkwardly on his head. After all he had been through, the family issues, the homelessness, the need for help from the social worker, the placement in a shelter, the extra time after school getting help from his teachers, he had finally made it. He was about to graduate, and he heard his name called, Michael Casey. Given his diploma, shook hands with the principal, and smiled in elation as he knew he had finally made it. So this is one of those things where we use narrative techniques to get the reader interested. But now we have to do the transition step here, basically narrowing step between what we introduced with Michael's story all the way then to being specific to our thesis. So Michael had gone through a lot and had shown grit, perseverance, and passion, made decisions. Similarly, and then this is basically our thesis, our final step. Similarly, the features of passion and perseverance and making good choices and knowing when to change are features of success and are expressed in the sources which follow. This is a little bit different because I named the 3 sources that we were doing. In the previous example, I named them. You don't have to name them, but I did name them here. So that takes us to another option. We have the opportunity. That's the second option on our page. This is another example of that. So according to a recent study, as much as 70% of Americans report, and so basically you have a series of shocking statistics about engagement, about people motivated to do their jobs. And notice I did have to cite that. If you do get statistics, you're going to have to look up where you got them from, and you're probably going to have to ask Miss Rigler or myself, how do you cite that? But nonetheless, a really good example of here, which is shocking statistics. Then we have a narrowing step. So the lesson here is that money is not the reason people quit or are disengaged in their jobs. Rather, the ability to motivate and engage employees leads to more engagement and more revenue. So there's a narrowing step. And this is actually more of the narrowing step, which then brings us to the thesis, the main idea that we are going to be analyzing in the three sources, which is grit, passion and perseverance, making good choices, and knowing when to quit could be essential. As, and they're explained in the sources which follow. So obviously then we've got our 3 paragraphs worth of analysis, one in perseverance, one for making good choices, and the third one is for knowing when to quit. So those are some techniques that you can do to write good introductions, and these are just 3 different examples. Interesting words. This one was an anecdote, and we had to indent. And then the third one was using shocking stats or statistics and facts and things like that. But all of them had a hook, all of them had a narrowing step, and all of them had the main idea or thesis of our essay.